Story 1. The Stretcher in the Walls. There was something about the old St. James Hospital that never sat right with me. Even before I ever saw it in person, the place had a legend that crawled down your back like sweat in a fever dream. Every town has a haunted house. Ours had St. James. It had been closed for 40 years, yet no one ever did anything with it. No renovations. No demolition. Just boarded windows and steel doors that somehow always seemed to rattle when you walked past. Folks whispered that if you leaned in close enough, you could still hear the gurneys rolling through the halls. I didn't believe in any of it until I stepped inside. I was 17, and my friend Daniel talked me into exploring the place with him and his older cousin Trey. It was the middle of August, the air thick with heat and the stench of mildew that clung to the bricks like the building was sweating memories. We slipped through a side door Trey had jimmied open weeks earlier, using a crowbar and a lot of nerve. The inside was worse than I imagined: peeling wallpaper, black mold blooming in the corners, broken wheelchairs turned on their sides like abandoned dogs. "Bet you $5 we find the old psych wing," Daniel smirked. "Double it if we find that underground operating room," Trey added. "You know, the one they used when the state banned experimental surgeries." I laughed it off. All urban legend nonsense. Until we hit the elevator shaft. The elevator was long gone, but a maintenance ladder still clung to the side of the shaft like a rusted spine. We climbed down 6 stories, our flashlights barely cutting through the thick, oppressive dark. That's when the air changed colder. Wet. It smelled like anesthesia and copper. The bottom opened up into a hallway that wasn't on any of the old blueprints we found online. This wasn't a patient wing. It was something else. The walls were smoother, cleaner, almost surgical, like they had been scrubbed recently. But the floor told a different story. Dried blood stained the tile like spilled ink. Gurney tracks led in both directions, as if someone had been pushing bodies around recently. Trey was the first to say it out loud. "This place isn't abandoned." We turned a corner and found the first room. Inside, rows of stretchers lined the walls, each one occupied. But they weren't bodies. Not exactly. They looked like mannequins, mouths open in frozen screams, eyes carved out and replaced with polished black stones. Each had a patient wristband. Each had a name. One of them was mine. I stepped back so fast I knocked over a tray table, and the sound echoed down the corridor like a scream trying to escape. Then we heard the gurney wheels. Faint at first. Then louder. Squeak. Roll. Squeak. Roll. I turned my flashlight toward the sound. Something was coming. It wasn't walking. It was dragging itself along the ceiling, pale limbs spidered outward, its body hanging like a bloated tick. Its face was wrong, like skin stretched over a skull with too many teeth. It smiled when the light hit it. Trey bolted, Daniel followed. I couldn't move. The thing dropped from the ceiling with a wet slap, its limbs cracking into place as it unfolded, standing taller than any man should. It tilted its head and opened its mouth, and from inside I heard voices. My mother. My grandfather. My own voice crying as a child. It took a step toward me. I ran. Down another corridor, past more rooms, more stretchers. All of them filled. All of them watching. As I passed, their heads turned, just slightly, tracking me. I found Daniel crouched near an elevator shaft at the far end of the hall, sobbing. Trey was gone. Just gone. Not a drop of blood. Not a scream. Like he'd been erased. "We have to go," I hissed. Daniel didn't move. "I saw it," he whispered. "It took my face. It's wearing me." I didn't understand what he meant. Until I looked behind me and saw Trey. Or something wearing Trey's skin. It waved. I grabbed Daniel and dragged him toward the shaft. He fought me the whole way, muttering something over and over. "Don't get on the stretcher. Don't let them wheel you in." We climbed out. We didn't speak for days. Daniel stopped talking completely. They found him 2 weeks later, inside the hospital. Strapped to a stretcher. Smiling. His eyes had been removed and replaced with black stones. When they checked security footage from the night he vanished, there was no sign of him entering the hospital. No broken lock. No forced door. But he was in there. Waiting. They locked the place up tighter after that. Chained every entrance, boarded every window. But sometimes at night, when the wind is still and the moon hangs low, you can hear them inside. Squeak. Roll. Squeak. Roll. And if you're unlucky enough to get close, you might hear your name echoing through the walls. Because once the hospital knows you, it never forgets. And eventually it wants you back. Story 2. The 9th floor doesn't exist. They say the old St. James Hospital only had 8 floors. That's what the official plans show, anyway. What the city records confirm. What every employee who ever worked there swore under oath when it shut down in 1983. But that's a lie. There's a 9th floor. And I found it. It started with the journal. I was helping catalog donations at the Historical Society when I found it tucked inside a box marked "Medical Waste, Burn Permit Pending." Inside was a leather-bound notebook, warped by time and stained with something dark along the edges. The name scratched across the inside cover was Dr. Peter Cavanaugh. I didn't know it then, but Cavanaugh was the last chief of surgery at St. James. Disappeared the same day the hospital shut down. Never seen again. His final entry was dated October 14, 1983. "We've sealed off the 9th. The others insisted. They heard it again, the crying in the vents, the laughter in the drains. I don't know how it reached through the pipes, but it did. I saw Margaret in the hallway. Margaret died last week. I don't think it can die." That's all it said. After that, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The blueprints, the rumors, the fact that the hospital had been abruptly condemned without reason. It didn't add up. So I broke in. It wasn't hard. St. James had become more of a local ghost story than a crime concern. I went in through the rear ambulance bay, flashlight in one hand, bolt cutters in the other. Inside, the hospital was a tomb. Dust hung in the air like ghost skin. The silence felt thick, like it had teeth. I wandered the halls until I found the central elevator shaft. There were 8 floors listed on the panel. But there was a gap. Between 8 and B for basement, the panel skipped a number. Someone had tried to cover it up, but the outline was still there, barely visible under the grime. 9. There was no button. But there was a keyhole. I didn't have the key, but I had time. After hours of searching through staff offices, I found it in a drawer labeled Inventory, Restricted Access. The key was attached to a ring with 2 tags, one marked Admin Wing, and the other blank. I returned to the elevator, slid in the key, the doors groaned, and the elevator descended. Not up, down. I hit the button for 9. The light didn't change, but the feeling did. My ears popped. The air pressure shifted. The walls of the elevator began to sweat. Then the doors opened. The hallway stretched in both directions, cleaner than any others in the building. Almost new. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead. The walls were tiled in soft green, like a pediatric ward. But the sound. God help me, the sound. It was music. Children's lullabies played on a loop, warbling and warped like a broken music box. And underneath that, something else. Sobbing. I stepped out. Room 913 was the first one I passed. The door stood open. Inside, a hospital bed. Straps on each limb. A large, jagged stain beneath the mattress that had never been cleaned. The window was painted black from the outside. On the wall, written in something brown and cracked with age. "We're not patients. We're ingredients." I backed out fast. Room 917 was locked. The door was hot to the touch. From inside I heard breathing, long ragged, like something asleep and dreaming of knives. Further down, I found a nurse's station. Monitors buzzed with static. One flickered and cleared. A video feed. A child sat in a room with no furniture, facing the corner. Skin pale as chalk. Hair soaked and stringy. Slowly, she turned her head toward the camera. Her eyes were hollow. And then she smiled. And mouthed my name. I stepped back. And the screen went black. Then the lights died. Total darkness swallowed the corridor, and I heard the sound. Scraping metal, like wheels on tile. And underneath that, something breathing wetly. It was coming. I ran. Crashed through a door marked sterile wing. Found myself in a room filled with surgical tables, each occupied. But the patients weren't dead. Not exactly. Their chests rose and fell. But their skin was open. Their insides rearranged into patterns I didn't understand. Not medical. Not ritual. Something worse. Their eyes tracked me as I passed. A woman's voice echoed through the vents. "You shouldn't be here. They'll want your name." I sprinted back to the elevator. No lights. No buttons. No keyhole. Just a reflective surface. I saw myself. And behind me, a long, tall figure in stained surgical scrubs. No face. Just bandages. Taut and oozing. It raised one hand and pressed it to my reflection. So did I. And the elevator doors opened. I don't remember the ride. Just the impact of sunlight on my face, and the smell of fresh air as I stumbled out the ambulance bay. I don't talk about that night. I burned the journal. But I dream of that hallway still. Room 917. The bandaged surgeon. The girl who smiled without eyes. And a reflection that isn't mine anymore. The hospital's been sealed again. Welded shut. But every so often, kids dare each other to go near it. And if you listen real close on a quiet night, you can hear the chime of an elevator descending to a floor that doesn't exist. Story 3: The Violet Room. The old St. James Hospital was never supposed to handle psychiatric patients. It wasn't built for that. No reinforced doors. No padded cells. But when the state facility in Belshire burned down in 1966, they sent the worst of the surviving inmates to St. James. Temporarily, they said. They were housed in the East Wing, 3rd floor. Staff called it the Violet Room because of the hallway walls, painted lavender in some misguided attempt at calm. But the paint peeled almost instantly, like the building itself was trying to reject them. One of the nurses wrote in her report that the color turned darker each day, until it matched the shade of a bruised throat. The state took them back a year later. Or said they did? Because even now, decades after the place shut down, people whisper about the Violet Room, the last door on the left of the East Wing hallway. Room 307. Always locked. Always colder than the others. And never listed in the patient registry. No one knew who or what was kept inside. I didn't go looking for it. I was researching the hospital for a thesis. My angle was cultural folklore, the way rural communities build mythologies around decaying institutions. I wanted to demystify St. James. Instead, I found the room. It started with the blueprints. The archived plans showed 30 rooms on the 3rd floor. But when I overlaid them with a fire marshal's inspection from 1980, there was an extra space. Unmarked. Just a square nestled at the end of the East Wing. The dimensions didn't make sense. Too big for a storage closet, too small for a ward. So I broke in. The halls were coated in dust and graffiti. Most of the rooms had been gutted. Bed frames rusting into the floor, shattered glass crunching underfoot. But the East Wing? It was quiet. Too quiet. My footsteps echoed too long. And I swear the air smelled like old lavender. The door to room 307 wasn't like the others. It was metal. Steel reinforcements bolted across the edges. A viewing slot welded shut, and painted across the center, in flaking black letters. Restrain at all times. No handle. No lock. Just the suggestion that whatever was inside shouldn't get out. I stepped back, unease blooming in my gut. Then the hallway light flickered, and I saw something move behind me in the reflection of a broken glass shard. I turned. No one. But the steel door? It was open. I didn't hear it creak. Didn't hear any latch turn. Just open. A few inches. Beyond it, nothing but darkness. I should have left. Instead, I stepped in. The walls were covered in deep violet paint, faded and slick with moisture. The air was hot, humid, like something breathing on the back of your neck. At the center of the room stood a chair. A surgical chair, the kind with straps for wrists, ankles, and neck. But the straps weren't empty. They were torn, frayed like something had struggled for years. The floor beneath was coated in scratch marks and blood. I lifted my flashlight and saw a message carved into the wall in inch-deep gouges. She cannot be unmade. Behind me, the door slammed shut. I spun, flashlight sweeping across the room, but there was no one. Just a faint humming. It came from the walls. I pressed my ear to one, and heard it, whispers. Hundreds of them. Soft, childlike, overlapping in a chaos of muttered prayers, screams, lullabies. And one voice above them all. A woman's. Clear. Measured. Do you remember the taste of your own name? My knees buckled. I stumbled back, hit the chair, and for a split second I saw her. A woman sitting in the chair, bound in torn leather straps, skin split down the center like a blooming flower. Her face was blank. No features. No mouth. But her voice poured into my head like smoke. I gave them peace. I took their noise. I made them clean. Would you like to be clean too? The room pulsed. The shadows grew teeth. I screamed and flung myself at the door, pounding until my fists bled. The metal was ice cold now, slick with condensation. Behind me, she stood. Closer. I don't remember getting out. I woke up in my car. Engine running. Headlights pointed at the hospital doors. The recording on my phone was still playing. But it was nothing I had ever said. They let her out. You open the door. She's in your mouth now. In your lungs. Breathe deeper. I deleted it. Smashed the phone for good measure. I tried to forget. But something followed me home. My mirrors fog for no reason. My breath sometimes mists in summer. And every now and then I wake up with my mouth sewn shut, thread across my lips, still wet with blood. It always disappears before I can show anyone. But it's real. I know it's real. And sometimes, when I speak, it's not my voice that answers back. Story 4, The Night Ward. They say the patients in Ward C never screamed. That was the first thing I was told when I started working the graveyard shift at the temporary shelter set up in the old St. James Hospital. A recent storm had knocked out the regional care facility, and the county, short on options, commandeered the old hospital as a stopgap. My job was to watch over the mentally ill evacuees placed in the Eastern Ward, Ward C. No one would take the night shift. Not the locals. They wouldn't even walk me in past 10 p.m. Just dropped the patients off, handed me a ring of keys, and told me to lock the doors behind me. And one last thing, said the man from the transport van, don't let them wander. Why? They don't wander during the day, he said. Only at night. And only here. The patients weren't violent. Not outwardly. They barely spoke. 14 total. All of them older. Thin, with deep-set eyes and strange tattoos on the backs of their necks. Symbols that looked ancient, almost surgical. The first night, everything was quiet. Too quiet. No groaning pipes. No wind. Just fluorescent lights that buzzed slightly, like something breathing. At 3:13 a.m., the lights flickered. Not once. Not twice. 3 times. And then, in perfect unison, every patient sat up in their beds. All of them. At once. I froze. They stared straight ahead. Unblinking. One began to hum, a flat, droning tune with no melody. The others joined, their voices layered and low, vibrating through the walls. Then they stopped, in unison again, and all looked at me. One, the oldest, a woman with skin so pale it looked translucent, smiled and said, "It's almost time for rounds." I looked at the door. No one was scheduled. Just me and them. But then, I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow. Deliberate. Metal clacking, like heels on tile. Only, no one should have been there. I stepped into the corridor, and the lights went out. Not flickered, died. Pitch black. I heard keys jangling down the hall, just beyond sight. And a cart rolling. Slow. Creak. Clank. Creak. Clank. I backed up toward the nurse's station. My flashlight wouldn't turn on. A voice came from the darkness. Time for medicine. Then a face appeared. Pale. Hollow. Wearing a nurse's cap soaked with something dark. Her eyes were gone, replaced with surgical mesh. Her teeth had been filed into rows of jagged points. She pushed a rusted med cart filled with vials. Each was labeled with a patient's name. And mine. She reached for me. I ran. Down the corridor, past open patient doors. But something was wrong. There were more rooms than before. I passed 306, 307, 308, then 306 again, 308, 309, 306. The hallway looped, stretched, warped. I could hear my own footsteps out of sync, like someone was running just behind me, bare feet slapping tile. I ducked into a room and slammed the door. Inside was an old gurney and a mirror bolted to the wall. My reflection wasn't me. It was me wearing a nurse's cap, holding a scalpel, smiling. The mirror fogged. Words formed in the steam. Every ward needs a night nurse. I bolted. Back into the looping corridor, heart slamming in my chest. A siren wailed somewhere far off, low and pulsing, like something beneath the building was awakening. Then I saw them. The patients. All 14. Standing in the hallway, facing me. In their hands were old ID tags. Each had their picture, name, and date of death. All from the 1970s. I stepped back. The hallway behind me was gone. Just wall. And a door that hadn't been there before. A small plaque read, "Night ward, staff only." I had no choice. Inside was a surgical theater. Outdated. Rusted. A single chair sat beneath a spotlight. Straps curled around it like vines. The med cart was there too. And beside it the nurse. Waiting. She pointed to the chair. "Time for your shift." I screamed. I don't remember leaving. Just waking in my car with dawn breaking over the trees. The building had changed. No East Wing. No Ward C. Just rubble and caution tape. The official report said the wing collapsed during the storm. No patients were ever logged. No staff was assigned. And when I went to return the ring of keys, the facility said they didn't use that system anymore. Those models were from the 1950s. They don't believe me. But I kept one thing. My ID badge. The one I wore during my shift. Only now it has a photo I don't remember taking. And a title I never earned. Staff, Night Nurse, Ward C. And on the back, a scrawled message. You always return to your rounds. Story 5, the bell never rang. Long before the doors of Old St. James Hospital were welded shut, Before the town began whispering stories of stretchers and shadows, there was the bell. It hung above the central atrium, rusting quietly in the rafters since the early 1900s. They say it rang only once in the building's history, on its opening day, to signal the beginning of hope, healing, and new life. After that, it stayed silent. No one pulled its chain again. Not even during fire drills. The nurses swore it didn't work. The maintenance men said the cord had snapped decades ago. But patients still heard it. Always at night. Always at 4:44 a.m. The staff eventually stopped denying it and started warning new hires. If you hear the bell, do not leave your station. Do not look for it. Do not follow it. They never said what would happen if you did. I was a documentary filmmaker. Had done 3 local legends already: the Silent House, the Hollow School, and the Red Lake Children's Home. When I heard the rumors about the bell at St. James, I thought I'd found my next piece. But this wasn't folklore. It was a trap. I got access through a friend at the Preservation Society. They thought documenting the hospital might speed up interest in historic grants. I didn't tell them I planned to spend the night. I arrived just before midnight. Hauled in my camera, a mic, thermal reader, and a drone I'd modified for tight spaces. I set up in the atrium, directly beneath the bell. It loomed above like a corpse hanging by its neck. The silence was absolute. Even the air felt thick with waiting. At 4:41 a.m., I started rolling. At 4:44 a.m., the bell rang. Once. Not the faint clatter of metal. Not some imagined echo. It rang. Loud and clear, as if it had been struck by the hand of God. My ears popped. My equipment spiked. Every light blinked red. Every sensor screamed. And then, the building shifted. It's hard to describe. It wasn't movement, not exactly. It was more like the hospital inhaled. The walls groaned inward, and the floor beneath me buckled, not enough to throw me off balance, but enough to tell me something had changed. I looked up. The bell was gone. In its place hung something else. It looked like a cocoon. Wet. Pulsing. And from inside I saw light. Not warm light. Not holy. Flickering, strobe-like. Chemical. Wrong. I stepped back. My boot hit something soft. A body. But not fresh. Not rotted either. Desiccated. Hollowed out like a wasp nest. Still in uniform. A nurse's ID badge dangled from her collar. The date on it? May 12th, 1961. I blinked, and she was gone. So was the cocoon. And the atrium. I wasn't in the same room anymore. I stood in the hallway now, lined with closed doors. No windows. No exit. Behind each door, I could hear whispers. Some begged. Some screamed. Some sang lullabies in reversed English. I moved slowly, calling out, but my voice sounded wrong. Muffled. Delayed. Like I was hearing myself from underwater. The 4th door opened on its own. Inside was the bell. Only now it was lying on the ground. Cracked. Leaking something thick and dark that hissed as it touched the floor. A voice echoed around me, female, soft, and distant. It rings for the next. Then I felt breath on my neck. I turned, and came face to face with myself. Or rather, what looked like me. Only older. Hollow-eyed. Lips torn at the edges, like something had pulled them wider than skin should stretch. It wore my clothes, held my camera, and spoke with my voice. You never left. It lunged. I don't remember the escape. Only fragments. Falling down a stairwell that shouldn't exist, crawling through a laundry chute slick with rust, sprinting across the cafeteria where corpses sat upright, still chewing on meals that had rotted into maggots. When I finally burst out the front doors, it was dawn. The building was still. The bell hung, rusted and quiet, exactly where it had always been. But my footage, it didn't match my memory. I watched it once. In it, I never moved from the atrium, never ran, never left. I just stood there, staring up at the bell. And at 4:44 a.m., I smiled. Then the video cuts to black. I tried to delete the file. The entire hard drive failed. I smashed the camera, burned the tapes, but every time I boot a new device, the same file appears. Bell_444.mkv. It won't open now. Just loops a still image of the atrium. Empty. But sometimes, just sometimes, I see a figure standing under the bell. Me. And I swear, I'm ringing it. And each time I do, the crack spreads wider. They say the bell never rang. They were wrong. It only rings for those it wants back. And soon, it's going to shatter.